Hey everybody, we are teaching Tilt Brush, and this particular Tilt Brush episode is all about our textured paint brushes. On our first page of brushes, that top row, these paints have very specific textures to them. So we're going to look at these textures and how we can use them different ways for different effects in the paintings we create. I'm using our blank white stage here so we don't have to worry about lighting and background interference. I'm choosing a nice neutral color, and we're going to look at these textures themselves first. We're going to get a nice big brush and go right down the line. The first one, referred to as oil paint, you can see it's got this nice brush texture to it. With the oil paint, it is the same texture. Let me get up close here. If I do it short versus long, you can see it's the same texture, just getting stretched out. If I do it this way, let's see if you can see it nice and clear. You can see it's just one texture getting stretched out as we make it longer and longer. It's just one shape being elongated for the length of your stroke. So the oil paint has that nice sort of almost smooth painted surface. The next one, ink, it's even smoother than that. And it also has this gloss, this light and shadow. If we bring that right up to the camera, you can see how the top edge is highlighted and the bottom edge is shadow. And if I paint a nice long stroke, you can see how it follows that light source. If we do change the light source, it will change that light and shadow. Like the oil paint, the ink, it's the same texture, just being stretched for a longer stroke. Even though it's got longer spikies, it's the same spikies at the end of it. So the ink and the oil are both a set texture, and the longer your stroke is, the more they stretch that texture. Thick paint is a little bit different. First and foremost, it's got this wonderful splattery texture to it. But you'll notice as I'm painting it, it's not stretching. Unlike the other two textured paints, this one is a set texture. If we look closely, we can see that the texture does repeat over and over. You can find one key part of the paint and see it's repeated over and over. In fact, if we're careful, we can even try to make it roughly the same size and get that piece roughly in the same place. So you can see it is the same texture, but instead of stretching it, it's repeating it over and over and over again to fill the space. It is also directional. So if you paint it one way, it appears one way. And if you paint it the other way, it goes the other way. So back and forth and different changes of direction can build up this really rough textured surface. Unlike the other two, it is not stretching the texture. The final one is the wet paint. It's got a slightly glossy surface like the ink. It's got a slightly brushstroke texture like the oil. And like those other two, this is also a set texture that gets stretched out for the longer stroke. So the thick oil is the only one that does not stretch. So if you want that pattern and you want it repeated, you're actually going to have to paint that pattern over and over and over, and you can see how it is indeed the exact same pattern, that little hole in that beginning corner all the way down. Also helps if you angle it so the light can see it better. But as you can see, they're all pretty much the same texture being repeated. The wet ink has that lovely gloss, so this looks almost like cake frosting. Whereas the other ones are a little more matte, they don't have quite as much gloss. This is the oil paint here, so you can see how the wet paint has that glossiness, whereas the oil paint is fairly matte, fairly flat. So we've got these different textured brushes, and you can see how one of them is the only one that doesn't stretch. You can use these for a lot of different effects and a lot of different surfaces depending on what you're trying to paint. So if I went for a fairly solid brown using either the oil or the ink, you can see how this is almost like boards. We've got that slight texture that can almost be a wood grain depending on how we work with it. So we can use these textures to build up a specific surface, a specific feeling. We can use color and light to give it substance, to give it a material. So whether it's wood like this or going for the ink in a bluish gray, gives us a very sort of metallic type of surface. If you look closely, there is this sort of burnished texture to it. So it's not just a flat color, but now we're starting to use these paint strokes to imply different materials, different object types. If I go for a nice dark greenish blue and go for that thick paint, the really thick one, remember how I was doing ocean waves before? Now, not only do we have the ocean wave type, but the waves themselves have a rippled surface. So now let's do our select all, duplicate, select all, duplicate. So not only do I have the wave pattern, but the water itself has this wonderful surface to it, this rippled surface. So not only do I have my waves, but the water itself. So now we'll take that, we'll give it the flat blue background so you can't see what's behind it. Unlit in our dark blue. So now we've got the waves, now we add a little bit of spray between them. That type of thing. And now the texture of the paint itself helps give the surface a much more ripply, breezy type of surface. So using these paint surfaces really help give you a lot more feeling in your material. So rather than just fields of color, we've got solid surfaces here that we're working on. Whether we're trying to replicate wood or metal, plastic or water, look carefully at how these textures can be used to give your objects much more solid feel, much more like there's a real object there. If you make them the different sizes, it will affect their textures. So let me get my colors going here. We're going to start with our small, thick paint, larger, thick paint, supersized, thick paint. And you can see how it's the same texture, zooming in on the different sizes, depending on the thing you're trying to create and the surface you're trying to feel. This especially on another colored background. It could be an old pavement, like a street on the ground, nice post-apocalypse. This could be an old stucco wall. It's got that type of surface, so we'll go for the pale beige and maybe a brick texture behind it, that type of thing. So really look at these surfaces and let your imagination play with what sort of surfaces you could try to create. Changing the color and the light really lets you take these inks, that first set, and get a lot more variety than just mere painting with a paintbrush. But we can really create solid surfaces for the worlds we're trying to create. So have fun with that. I'm going to use my thick paint just because it's a lot of fun, but I'm going to make it a little bit big so we can read what I'm writing here. We do this all the time, youtube.com/shamelessmayhem. We also do them live on Twitch TV/shamelessmayhem. Let us know if you have things you'd like to learn about. Let us know if there are more lessons and programs you'd like us to teach you. We do this all the time and have a lot of fun, so come back every week, subscribe to see what's coming up, have fun with Tilt Brush. I look forward to seeing what you do with it.